Yeah, so just a little bit more on my background is I came to NNU, in 2013. So this is my 8th year there. Uh, when I came to NNU, I didn't have a PhD, but they had said they were going to encourage me to do it. So within a year starting, at NNU, I started working on a PhD in computer science at the University of Idaho. Primarily looking again at leveraging work that I had done before I came to NNU, contracting with the Forest Service and BLM. So the area I ended up going in with my dissertation dealing with ecology, with fire ecology, is what we now call data science. So it's looking at using it's interdisciplinary field, looking at scientific methods and processes. Really what we're looking at is saying, because we have so much data today, that really in order for us to be able to leverage that for specific domains, in my case, initially fire ecology, but more recently archaeology, we're having to get a synthesis of computer science and math and statistics. So math and statistics and ecology, there's been that pairing for a long time. Now we're getting so much data and so much unstructured data that we really have to pull computer science into the mix to be able to get to really leverage the data. And the whole idea was all the data that we have available to us now is being able to, the big thing is extract actionable knowledge from the data. So in my case, initially with fire ecology, we were asking the questions of where did the fire burn and how severely did it burn. So let's go back and look at a little bit more at what it is that we're trying to do and how we accomplished it. Working with wildland fire. So the first thing that we wanted to look at is when you talk about fire severity, it can mean a variety of things. So we had to narrow that down, and in particular, because we're starting to work with small unmanned aircraft systems, SUASs, we knew we didn't want to be near active fire, because the last thing I wanted to do is have one of my drones go into the engine of an air tanker. That just wouldn't end up well. So we focused on what was happening after the fire. So we call that burn severity, and saying we're looking at first order fire effects. What are the effects of the fire after the flames are out, or sometimes there's still a little bit of smoldering and a little bit of flame as we're going in and doing the analysis. But what was happening in particular, we're looking at severity, we're looking at asking the question, what happened to the surface vegetation? Did it burn? If it burned, how severely did it burn? So to kind of set the stage here, this is out by Lucky Peak, about 2017, a fire out there that burned along the highway, along Highway 21. And along here, now, hey, Brian, can you tell me, can you see my mouse?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Yes. That is a pointer. Awesome. So right along here where the mouse is that had been a creek, and there's a little bit of a riparian zone. So you can see there's a lot of white ash there. Kind of coming in closer to a spot here. We can see right here where there's significant amounts of white ash. Just a few days before, that was a sagebrush. And so when the fire comes through, the sagebrush has more fuel. It'll hold the fire longer, and it will have more complete combustion. It's just like you look at a campfire. You can tell where it was hottest when it burns out, and you look at it in the morning by going, where's the white ash? So it's the same thing in a fire. You get out these areas a little bit further away where it's just black, where all there was grass, and the fire came through, and it probably didn't even clear through the stalks of grass. So that's where we're looking at burn severity when we're saying how bad did the fire burn. So our objective here was to improve the accuracy with which we can map wildland fire. In particular, looking at hyperspatial imagery using small unmanned aircraft systems or drones. And what we're gauging against is what can we do with the remote sensing platforms that land managers typically use. We're talking Landsat. In the United States, that's primarily what they were doing, especially 8 years ago. Although there's some other products that are starting to get a little bit of acceptance now, but primarily we're looking at Landsat. So 2 questions: where did the fire burn? How severely did the fire burn? So in order that, we've already talked a little bit about black ash, like where things are not as completely combusted. If you have more complete combustion, you're going to have white ash. One of the things we noticed with white ash is it can very easily blow away, or you get some rains, it'll wash down into the soil. So we actually were working with some scientists up in the Moscow Forest Sciences Lab on some studies with that. So that's what we're looking for, where it's burned. It hasn't. Oh, and I think we got somebody who doesn't have their mic muted. So if you could do that, that would be great. Thank you. So looking at the unburned vegetation, there's two different types of vegetation we're looking at. One is it herbaceous or shrubs? Is it surface vegetation? The other thing that we look at, and initially actually with my dissertation, we didn't look too much at this because most of the data was down in the Treasure Valley, so it's sagebrush steppe. But we've more recently also started looking at saying, do we have canopy vegetation? Because that adds a complication that we'll talk about just a little bit later that actually is what we're working on right now. So utilization of UASs for image acquisition, small unmanned aircraft systems. So this is one of my teams of students out on a prescribed burn. We primarily, although not exclusively, use DJI Phantom 4s. They are our workhorse. We do have some pros, but with the 20 megapixel camera, but we're finding that even the older just Phantom 4s with the 12 megapixel camera, when you can only fly at 400 feet or 120 meters, the spatial resolution is getting really high. And we were seeing with the 20 megapixel camera, the only thing we were doing was just adding more data. But we chose that platform. It's a very common platform, but the big thing we're looking at was it comes with a color camera. We do have a drone that has a near infrared camera on it, but we wanted to stick with the Phantom 4s with the color camera because we went, that's what, when we get to the point where the Forest Service and the BLM are buying drones, they're going to be buying drones with or small unmanned aircraft systems. They'll be buying them with color cameras. So we can fly them. We've flown them both remotely piloted, so flown manually or autonomous. We actually prefer to fly them manually because we're very commonly in very mountainous terrain. There's also the issue of because we're in mountainous terrain with a lot of different varying vegetation, we run into problems with the Part 107 requirements of you have to be able to keep eyes on it at all time. If we say, go fly this rectangle, it's going to go behind a tree. So we have to maintain, for a variety of reasons, we typically will maintain manual control over the drones. Once we're done, as it's flying, it's taken a whole bunch of pictures. We prefer to use Pix4D capture as the control app that we use on the iPad. So we have it set up to be taking pictures about every 10 meters. Once we're done, with flying an area, we'll come back and we'll use Pix4D to create georeferenced orthomosaics. In addition to that, as a byproduct, we also get the 3D point clouds, which more recently have been something that have been very useful for us for validating our data. So when we're coming back and look at those orthomosaics, what we're wanting to look at is mapping post-fire land cover components. What kind of ash do we have? Do we have black ash? Do we have white ash? What kind of vegetation do we have? Do we have a surface vegetation, herbaceous shrub, or are we looking at conifers or deciduous? So looking at resolution, 4 types of resolution you commonly look at. So hyperspatial, which is what we get with the small unmanned aircraft systems. With a 12 megapixel camera at 120 meters, you're typically getting about 5 centimeter. If you take the same image where you've got a 12 megapixel camera, if you compare it to 30 meter imagery, which is what you would get with Landsat, you're talking 48 pixels. We get a lot more data. So looking at the multispectral resolution, red, green, blue, we had done actually the first study we did while I was working on my doctorate was looking at saying, if we have red, green, and blue, do we have enough information coming off of the images to be able to tell a difference between white ash, black ash, herbaceous shrubs, surface vegetation, or the deciduous conifer canopy. And we found it actually, when we did a statistical analysis, we went, there's definitely between unburned and burned, there's a big difference there. But also even between the surface versus canopy fuels, we have some difference there, enough that it turns out we can tell the difference between them. We can train the machine learning algorithms to tell the difference. So temporal, this is a very significant thing with wildland fire, is they have requirements within 21 days of a suppression of a fire. They have to have a burn recovery plan in place. That includes collecting data. If they're using Landsat, one of the problems that they run into is it flies over every 16 days. So if it just flew over, you've now got a problem of, okay, if it's 16, if you're having to wait 16 days, okay, you've got what, 5 days left, so there's a real problem there. The flip side is, if you take a small unmanned aircraft system out, granted, it can't capture the large amounts of area that you can with a satellite system, but you can get it basically as soon as you get the drone out there. You can start getting imagery immediately. Okay, so looking at our spatial resolution, this is an example of an image taken with one of our Phantom 4s. Looking at it, you can see, for reference, kind of here in the corner here, we have a Suburban, one of the end-in-use science Suburban. So you look at this, we've got, these actually were prescribed burns. They were test burns, a collaboration between the University of Idaho and the BLM. And you can even see in here, you can see where there had been, a couple of days before there had been sagebrush. 2.5 days before their sagebrush. 2 days before, there was 10-foot flame lengths. It was actually out there when they were touched this off, and it was very interesting to watch the thing actually burn. The important thing here is we have white ash, saying we have higher severity. We have black ash, where there's not as much severity. And then we also have, out in here, we have unburned vegetation. These kind of brown lines here were dozer lines, where they went through with a bulldozer and made fire breaks. Also, it's kind of hard to tell, but right in here, there's one of two juniper trees that was in this picture. So when you're looking at this area, where'd my mouse go? There it is. When you look at this area here and you say, okay, if you look at any individual pixel, it's pretty much going to be one thing or another. It's either going to be black ash, or it's going to be white ash, or it's going to be surface veg, or it's going to be canopy veg. When you go to the 30-meter imagery, now you're going, well, which one was it? Yeah, we have mixed pixels. So it's showing up with a little bit of everything in it. Makes it really hard to make a call what's happening if you're dealing with that 30-meter data like we would have coming off of Landsat. So a little primer on what machine learning is. So I'm actually going to go forward one slide here. And what we do is machine learning is basically a method to where we take data that we know what it is, and we build a model that then, when we take other data that we don't know what it is, we don't know how it's been labeled, it'll use that model to say, well, this is what I think it is. So in this case, for example, we have this tool that was built by one of our seniors for a senior project a few years ago, where you could go in and you can go, okay, these pixels in here and the green here, these are all burned pixels. We got here this pink and these blue and this red, those are unburned pixels. So what happens when we go back into and we build a model with machine learning, the basic concept is we say, okay, that tool that we looked at before, it says, okay, we've got pixels, pixel coordinates. So we're going to come in here and we're going to say, okay, look at the image. The model here is going to say, look at the image, grab the red, the green, and the blue bands off that pixel. And think of this area here. Let's see, where's my mouse again? There we go. Think of this decision space where we have maybe here R1 is red and R2 is green. And now think of this as a cube coming out with you. coming straight out towards you would be R3, which would be blue. So instead of a square, think of this as a cube. So what it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, let's grab a bunch of these pixels that were marked as black. Okay, let's grab their RGB values and let's map them into this where we'd have 0 down here, and on the red we would have 255 up here. So it'll map them in there into that space. So it says, okay, if it said it was burned, okay, they're down here. And say, okay, now let's take the ones that we said were unburned, map them in. These green ones in here are the ones that are going to be unburned. So two different machine learning algorithms that we looked at in my dissertation that they're pretty easy to explain how they work. One is a support vector machine. It basically says, let's take these positive burned pixels, and let's take these negative unburned pixels, and let's use some linear algebra to create a divide. Well, in 2 dimensions it'd be a line, in 3 dimensions it would be a plane separating those. So just using linear algebra to find that. Whoa, that wasn't what I wanted to have happen there. So it'll make that plane. And so if I have another pixel that comes in, I have a pixel, I go, I don't know if it burned or not. And I go, okay, let's grab its RGB values, and we plot it into this red, green, and then blue coming out towards a space, and go, okay, where does it plot in there? And say, okay, is it on the burned or is it on the unburned? Is it on the burned positive, the unburned negative side of the hyperplane? Whichever side of the hyperplane it's on, or that plane, we'll say, okay, if it's on the burned side, we mark it as burned. If it's on the unburned side, we mark it as unburned. So nearest neighbor is kind of a similar thing. So you look at your red, your green, and your blue again, but this time it says we take, say, this red pixel here, and we bring it in here. So we have the red, green, blue off of that we use to plot it into our decision space here. And we go, okay, so if K nearest neighbor, we say, what is K? So if K is 5, we say, okay, let's grab the 5 nearest neighbors. Very democratic, have it vote. In this case, it's 4-1 saying it's unburned. So we'd say this red pixel here is unburned. And so we would label that pixel in the image, in a raster, corresponding where there's a pixel for every pixel in the image. We'd say this is an unburned pixel. So that's kind of a primer of what's happening with machine learning. So, one of the hypotheses we had with my dissertation was, is the support vector machine going, or the K nearest neighbor going to be a better algorithm? We'll get into what we found there a little bit later. Another thing another hypothesis that we had, another problem we looked at was, we said, so is hyperspatial, that drone-derived hyperspatial imagery, is it more effective at mapping burn severity than 30 meter? Well, you go back to right here and you go, yeah, we think we got a pretty good idea that 5 centimeter is going to really, it's really going to have a much better product than the 30 meter, because 30 meter, it's having to make a call for this entire pixel right here where you go, did it burn or not? Well, kind of. So we used a concept called fuzzy logic here as we're looking at this. Use fuzzy logic or fuzzy control, and the idea we had was that we went through and we used the 5 centimeters, so we get this really high accuracy data, and we say, let's use fuzzy logic to go back and say, okay, for a 30 meter pixel that's got what, 900,000 5 centimeter pixels inside of it, we say, okay, how many? Let's look at those to say, so did this 30 meter pixel burn or not? Considering that you may have a little bit of both in there. So as a little bit of a primer on what's happening with fuzzy logic is, with Boolean logic, we would say if less than 50% of the 5 centimeter pixels within a 30 meter pixel burned, then if less than 50% of them burn, then we say, okay, it's unburned. If more than 50% of them burned, we would say it's burned. The problem you have with that is, if we have 2 30 meter pixels right next to them, and one of them has 49.9999% of the pixels are burned, but on the next one next to it is 50.000001% of the pixels are burned. Why, if one of them only has a handful more pixels burned than the other one, why are we saying one is burned and the other's not? So fuzzy logic, actually, for ecologists love using fuzzy logic because it allows us to say, well, did it burn or not? We say, well, it kind of burned. It burned a little bit, some. So for example, we can say, instead of having that spike where we say, okay, we crossed 50% of the 5 centimeter pixels are within the 30-meter pixel are burned, we can say we're going to transition from starting at 35%. If it's below 35%, we say there's not enough of this burned to consider it burned. But as we go, and if we get above 65%, then we say, hey, yeah, it's enough of it's burned that we just call it burned. But between 35 and 65%, fuzzy logic allows us to say we're going to transition from it didn't burn, false, 0, to it did burn, 1, true, at 65. We can transition it here along and say it's going to transition from 0 to 1. This graph here actually is for biomass consumption by, if we have how much white ash, how many of the burned pixels within the 30-meter pixel are white ash pixels. So there, we felt that having that split at 50% was way too high. And so we said, well, let's have this transition between 33 and 50%, which made me a little nervous as I'm going, well, what are we basing that on? Well, fortunately, in my literature search, I was able to find a paper by someone who's now a good friend of mine, where she actually listed that as, okay, as you get 33, as you transition from 33 to 50% white ash of your area, as having, white ash, then you're transitioning from a low to a high severity fire. That was great because then I could put it in my background section. I didn't have to defend it, which was great. The problem we had was there was nothing in the literature that we could find that said, as you transition from 35 to 65, there's nothing in there where I could say, hey, I'm saying 35 to 65 because that's what this paper says. There was nothing there. So it was a little bit of I talked with my committee members, a pharmacologist, and she said, let's just put it in there. I think it's going to be okay. It makes sense to me. But really, I would have been much more comfortable if we could have said, okay, here's the paper. But things as it was transitioning around 50%, hey, we'll call it good. Is there much difference between saying 40 to 60 versus 35 to 65? Nobody's complained yet. And that the first place that being actually published was in a artificial intelligence paper. And I go, hey, if that's where it shows up first, that's, so the computer scientists are getting out ahead of the ecologists. So we use this idea of having not 0-1 Boolean logic, but going, yeah, maybe like in this case, we're at 40% white ash. We say we have 0.4 membership in the high combustion, and we have 0.6 membership in the low combustion, because it's a little bit to the left of the midpoint on that. Fuzzy logic allows us to be able to say, well, we want to look at multiple things. We want to look at biomass consumption membership, but we also want to look at, say, at extent. So we can define our fuzzy rules here of saying, well, if it's mostly burned and mostly high combustion, then we can say it's white ash. It's a high intensity 30-meter pixel. If it's mostly burned and low combustion, hey, Brian, you guys still hearing me okay?
Yeah, fine.
Perfect, okay. If it's mostly burned and low combustion, and we go, well, yeah, it burned, but we're going to label it as black ash as a low intensity burn. Yeah, if most of it's unburned, then we say, hey, we're just labeling it as unburned. And so then we go through and do this with each of the pixels, a bunch of the pixels on the 30-meter, use it to go back and train our support vector machine here at 30 meters using the 30-meter pixels, and are actually able to get somewhat of a map that works fairly decent. So let's go back and look at what kind of results we got with this. So for my dissertation, primarily in 2017, there were 16 fires primarily in the Treasure Valley that we flew. So a lot of sagebrush steppe. There's actually only one that was in a forested environment up by Idaho City. We'll actually have a picture of that here in just a little bit. This is an example of some imagery. This is the map that we got out of using the support vector machine. It also had a little tool we wrote that did a little bit of cleanup of getting rid of really small stuff, but an issue we'll talk about a little bit later. But really is able to do real good for saying this is where all the white ash was. This, the black here is unburned. The gray is, yeah, it's burned, but it's black ash. Okay, so no big surprise. This is what we get from, actually, this is what we get from that 30 meter of taking the, this here, feeding it through the fuzzy, the 5 centimeter burn classification, run it through the 30 meter, or train the 30 meter classifier and then run it on it. Oh, but there's something here that's kind of weird. Looking at this is, if you notice, this one here is actually upside down. The reality is actually this image is upside down because we had to actually do a lot of this work in ArcGIS. And this image right here, actually facing up, is actually the drone was facing south. So the reason why this is flipped around upside down is because we had to load it into ArcGIS. And at that point it said, no, you got to have north facing up. So still, it's interesting here looking at our results here. One of the things we're just absolutely ecstatic with is both the k-nearest neighbor and the support vector machine, 2 machine learning algorithms. They both did really well, but the support vector machine was giving us accuracies up in the mid-high 90%. So it was doing, as you can tell, looking at this 5 centimeter burn severity map, it was doing a really good job over all the fires. And like we expected with the spatial resolution here of comparing the drone, the hyperspatial derived 5 centimeter product, here again, getting accuracies in the 90%. Comparing it to 30 meters is exactly what we expected. It was way more accurate to use that high resolution imagery coming off the drones rather than looking at stuff that was the same resolution as Landsat. Now, one of the things what we used for the 30 meter imagery, going back here, I just kind of need to explain what's happening there a little bit. This is the same resolution as Landsat, but it's not actually Landsat. We wanted to remove all the variables except for spatial resolution. So what we simply did was we took this image here and we resized it using OpenCV, which we used for implementing the machine learning algorithms too, so that it was exactly the same image except the resolution has changed. If we tried using Landsat, then we've got issues of it's a different sensor. We've got atmospheric disturbance. We've got temporal resolution because, we're not going to be able to get something on the same day. We'll be lucky if we can get it within the same week. So we wanted to get rid of all of those other factors and just focus strictly on spatial resolution. So as we expected, was my committee member said, the spatial resolution problem was the Welder hypothesis. And yeah, it was the softball that we were able to hit out of the park. So if any of you ever go after a PhD, if you can get yourself a Welder hypothesis, that's a real good thing to do. So we had one fire that we were able to find. It's actually a prescribed fire up by Idaho City, up Hoodoo Creek. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So this is an example. Well, this is one picture here, and one image taken by the SUAS, which corresponds actually. So actually, let me go back here. So this is along the creek here. This little thing where we got some deciduous is actually sitting right here. So we took a whole bunch of pictures. As a flight where we had 3 different batteries. Would bring it down, put it back up with another battery, go take a bunch more pictures. So the distance from this side of the image to this side of the image is a little over a half mile. So covered quite a bit in area here. So just looking at the, taking this image and feeding it through the support vector machine, looking at burn extent, and this is what we got. So I have a question here looking at this, is if we're looking at this image and we say everything that's green is unburned, everything that's black is burned, there's a problem with this map. Okay, now, Mr. Kraus, Professor Kraus, I have to ask you, are your students used to speaking up on these Zoom meetings? At NNU, my students are encouraged, and when I pause like this and say, you know, they know it's not a rhetorical question, I'm expecting someone to answer. So are your students going to be able to do this for me?
I don't know if they're all my students here, and this is the first Zoom, but yes, anybody, I should say, if you have a question, feel free to either type it in the chat and I can bring it up, or if Professor Hamilton pauses, please feel to speak up, and we will also have an opportunity for a little Q&A at the end of this. So
Absolutely.
anytime you have a question, please feel free to speak.
Absolutely. So in particular, I'm giving you a hint. Look at this area here. Also look at this area right here. And I'm going somewhere I should be able to get chat. I'm going to grab the chat here. There we go. Okay, I have the chat screen up.
So Bob had a question about burned areas under the trees.
Bingo. That's it. You nailed it.
Bob
That's
is
the
first
problem.
winner.
That we have a winner. Yes, that is exactly what the problem is the drone, the small unmanned aircraft system. Let me get, it sees the tree. It can't look under the tree. So it looks at that and says, well, that looks unburned to me. And technically, it's, from what it sees, it's correct. But exactly like you mentioned, if I've got a spot here where I've got a tree and it's burned all the way around it, we need to be able to go in and say, no, that's actually burned, and we need to claim those pixels as being burned. Let's table this for a little bit, because that's actually the problem we're working on right now, and we're writing up the paper for what we've done just now. So a little bit later, we're going to come back to this problem. So about 2017, we came back to the Boise National Forest to say, hey, thank you for letting us fly fires. It was really helpful with collecting the data. We're kind of doing a horse and pony show and saying, hey, this is what we did. And when I came into the room, there was a couple of archaeologists. I'm going, why are there archaeologists in this? Why are there archaeologists in the room here? I was thinking, from my time having contracted with the Forest Service, okay, they're going to tell us, if you see something old, leave it where it is, take a picture of it, drop a pin so we know where to go to find it. Well, no, it actually turned out these guys were saying, if you can do this, if you can develop AI and machine learning to do this kind of mapping, we think that you can go find archaeological features from it. So we started out with with the BLM, with them inviting us out to do a couple of studies with can scatters, which is actually really fascinating. Well, this whole going into archaeology was a totally unexpected thing for me. 3 years ago, everything I knew about archaeology I had learned from Indiana Jones movies. Not the best place to learn archaeology. Now, with having worked with them for 2 years, 3 years, becoming much more familiar with archaeology, and I was even referred to by one of the Forest Service archaeologists as NNU's archaeology professor. I'm going, well, considering we have no other professors who deal with archaeology, okay, well, I guess I'm going to be assuming the duties. But the issue is, we're out at this site and they're saying, hey, we want to fly because we want to find cans. I'm going, why do we want to fly? Why do we want to find cans? Old tin cans. And they said, he walked out there with me as my students are getting ready to put the drone up, and he picked one can up and he said, okay, see this type of can here? See, there's a hole, it's got solder. Okay, they stopped making those in 1930. I said, oh, okay, got it. And he walked a little further, picked up another, and then says, see how this is kind of soldered and crimped around the edges? They didn't start making these cans till 1910. I went, oh, I get it. this campsite was occupied somewhere between 1910 and 1930. He went, you're exactly right. We now know when people were here. So one of the things that we looked at here is one of my students said, hey, let's see if we can take the support vector machine and going through pixel by pixel and say, hey, can we match the spectral reflectance, the spectral response, and say, can we find tin cans? So he went through and found some, and kind of hard to see when you're looking here where they are, but let's see, I'm gonna have to come back here to see where they are. But I'm looking like right in here, I can see 3 cans. Right here, I can see a can. But they really show up. I didn't even spot this one here. Now I look at it and go, I'm having to get in real close and put my glasses on. Yep, that's a can too. Yep. Which was an issue that we came up with this was going, this was doing such a good job that it actually was, we have a couple other pictures where we're doing this. It was actually finding cans that the humans, when they were looking at the picture, were not finding. And it wasn't until they went, like I just did here, they went back and went, oh yeah, there is a can there. Raised a real interesting question, because when you look at accuracy, which we're looking down here, accuracy is the percentage of the percentage of whatever it is you're looking at that you got right. So in our case, we're looking at pixels. And what happens though, when you're doing accuracy, you say, okay, what did the computer get? And then you say, okay, what was it saying? And then you say, what did the humans say? So you have a confusion matrix. And what happens though when the computer is getting things right that the human was saying, that the human was getting wrong? I mean, that kind of throws the whole idea of accuracy out the window of going, what happens when the computer starts actually doing a better job than the human? So interesting dilemma that we deal with. Okay, I'm seeing your hand up, Ryan.
Let me ask a question. So let me ask a question, not necessarily a question, but let me kind of say something. So before you were doing machine learning to detect cans, for example, you would fly drones or there'd be satellite imagery, and humans would have to look at these images by hand, one at a time, to identify where these cans are located. And so maybe you could do, I don't know, 10, 50, 100 a day before you're going crazy. But now with machine learning, the machine can probably look at these images, probably thousands of these things in a day.
Right.
With high accuracy.
Oh, yeah. In fact, the satellites, there are no satellites that are going to get, so in this case, we were flying the drones at probably about 30, maybe 20 meters. So we were down pretty close. So now we don't have 5 centimeter resolution. We've got like a 0.5 centimeter resolution. We have really, really high resolution. And we probably flew about 50 acres. So what that would have taken, and we did this like as we were first getting drones. I mean, drones were just becoming available. The BLM didn't have any at the point where we did this. And so what archaeologists would do is they would walk transects. They would get a bunch of archaeologists and you would walk along, all of you, in a line about, like 10 yards apart. Okay, with these cans, they're going to miss cans, just plain and simple. They couldn't use aerial imagery without drones, because there's no way you can get a camera in that close anyway other than a drone. But to cover 50, 100 acres like we did, it would take them forever. We got out there, we flew it, 2 or 3 batteries, so it may have been 40 minutes flying. Brought it back, ran it through, and it was finding stuff that they were saying there is absolutely no way a human running transects would have found them.
All right.
So yeah, it really is a paradigm shift in how archaeology is being done. So another thing we did is they brought us out on the Oregon Trail. So actually, this is down by Murphy, is an area that had burned over. So they wanted us to come out and fly this because, now all the surface vegetation's off. And so the Oregon Trail, if anyone's ever actually been on in these areas where it's not developed, you have what they call a swell. And it's like this trough that's probably about 2 feet deep, because you think 500,000 people going over this in covered wagons. Okay, you're going to have that pretty. So here again, we're able to come through here, and we knew where, you know, the red lines are, we're establishing our training data, kind of the same idea before, is grab those pixels. So the red is positive, blue is, you know, red is positive, it is a trail, blue is negative, not a trail. And we fed that through the support vector machine, and we can see through here that, yeah, it actually really did a real good job of catching the trail. You know, but we had a false positive here from where some firefighting rig had gone through, but still, it was able to catch the road, so, or the trail. So very, very encouraging about that. So another thing we started looking at is saying, can we find roads? So we started using a new concept. Up till this point, we've been feeding stuff in pixel by pixel. You know, the support vector machine would go through an image pixel by pixel and go, okay, look at the RGB values. Okay, what side of the hyperplane does that point fly? Is it on the burned or the unburned, or is it on the trail, not trail? Is it on the can, not can side of the hyperplane, and would label it accordingly. One of the things I didn't talk about is the third hypothesis from my dissertation. We established that you will map burn extent more accurately if you're doing something where you look at what the surrounding pixels are doing. So we had the idea of, hey, let's try this with using a concept called deep learning. It's a convolutional neural network. So this was one of the first attempts we had. One of the first attempts we had at using a convolutional neural network. We actually use TensorFlow if you've used it. And a convolutional neural network by itself will go, okay, you give it examples of roads, you know, and not roads, just like, you know, we talked about before. And it'll come through and say, okay, in this square, there's a road. Well, that's nice if you're going, okay, find the cat. Okay, the cat's in the square. Problem is, we're going, okay, so if it's in the square, okay, is it going bottom left to top right? Is it going bottom right to top left? You know, is it going, you know, was it actually curved like this? So we went, okay, yeah, deep learning, you know, might be okay, but it wasn't, you know, this was about 2018. We're going, yeah, it's not quite there yet. But we did recognize, okay, if we can find the roads, the reason from an archaeology standpoint why that was interesting to us was if we can find roads now quite often look very similar to historic rail grades. In this case, deep learning didn't find another road, it found a rail grade. So we're going, okay, there's something here that might be really good for us to be able to use. So we came through and went, okay, there's a new and improved convolutional neural network called a mask region-based convolutional neural network. We call it a mask RCNN. And now it kind of takes the idea of the convolutional neural network, but says, let's go ahead and give the training data for saying this is a road, you know, because, you know, we're figuring that with roads, it would be the spatial context, what's happening with the neighbors is going to matter. So we went ahead and established, you know, this training data, drew these polygons, trained the mask region-based convolutional neural network, the mask RCNN, and it came out, it was doing a great job of finding the roads. So really high accuracy here again, using deep learning. So we went, okay, so if we can find roads, we actually did use this on historic road grades, was able to have success there. We have the Bureau of Land Management in Wyoming is wanting to get us down there to again go down and say, okay, can we use this more accurately, because we're looking at, you know, what's happening around the pixel matters. They want to get us down there to fly portions of the Oregon Trail down in central Wyoming, but you know, we're going to have to wait till hopefully next summer we'll be able to get that lined up. They actually had the money for us to do it this summer, but if there's anyone on the call who's in, you know, your drone program there, you know that President Trump signed a order saying that the federal government, until we can be assured that that data from drones is not going to people that it's not intended to. He grounded all the drones. Biden has not lifted it yet. So our collaborators in Wyoming said, yeah, let's try next year. Hopefully it'll be lifted by then. So anyway, so we looked at, we're able to do really good with roads. Went, hey, how about dredge tailing? So leftover activity from dredge tailing in the early 20th century. Up in the Boise Basin again. So this is with the Boise National Forest. So this is got Grimes Creek coming through here. We've got old dredge tailings from when they were doing a lot of gold extraction from up there. So here again, use that tool we're using to outline a dredge tailing. So here's 3 of them that it had. And then again, I use the mask RCNN that relies on TensorFlow to say, okay, how can we do? So we came back other areas and went, yeah, it was able to identify them. We wrote a tool to be able to extract these out and actually put them into shape files, which we're able to hand to the Forest Service. So the thing is, we're looking at this is when we're looking at accuracy here, 84%, we're going, well, what do we compare it against? And so we're going, okay, so what do we have now that tells us where dredge tailings are? And it pretty much goes off of the old topographical maps, the 24K series, which are horrendous in their accuracy because they weren't trying to identify where, I can close that. They're not trying to identify. Okay, now it's sending me a whole bunch of notices here. Finally woken and saying stuff. I'm going, yeah, I've been on this call for 45 minutes. It's just trying to say, oh, there are dredge tailings out here. Not saying there's a dredge tailing here, and there's a dredge tailing here, and there's a dredge tailing here. So we haven't actually gone through and done this analysis of comparing what we're doing now against what we did before, like we did with the back here a few slides back here where we're comparing 2 different things. But my guess is Bings is those 20 those old topographical maps are they're just trying to go, oh, there's dredge tailings out here. We're going to end up with some sort of thing like this again, where we're going to be showing that we are way more accurate than what they're able to do with the off of the 24,000 series topographical maps. So remember, we had the question before about what about fire under the trees? So I want to talk about it because that's actually, before I do this, I want to take a step back. Remember, we were talking about this problem here with where we're looking at 30 meter. So I had a student last fall who went, Dale, what happens if we actually use Landsat imagery? Because the problem we have with a drone is we found, in one day, you're doing good to get 1,000 acres flown with a drone. And so we went, okay, if we could use the same method to be able to train a classifier to classify, burn extent off of Landsat imagery, that'd be great. And actually turns out it was very successful. And we just like a month ago ended up getting, a student and I got that paper published where we actually said, hey, let's ditch the resampled drone 30 meter imagery and let's actually use Landsat. So very successful. So let's come back here. So the problem we had here that we were looking at again was, okay, it's black all the way around it. So we should be calling this underneath these trees, we should be classifying these and mapping these as burned pixels. So what we did is we went ahead and used the mask RCNN again to do trees. So that's what we have right over here. We had the SVM going through, is it burned or not? And then we said, okay, also go through and find the trees, superimpose those. Turns out to be, pretty good there, but we have a little bit of noise along the edges. So we said, okay, well, how big are that noise? And he said, well, let me write something that will go through and say, okay, if the noise is less than like a 1/2 meter by a 1/2 meter, so a little over a foot by a foot. If it's something smaller than that, it's like, okay, just get rid of it. So it actually cleaned it up really good. And then we said, okay, now if we've got some of these that are black all the way around them, get rid of them. Say that they're burned. So that actually this image actually this set of images was actually run and given to me by the student last night. So we're in the process now. We're starting to work on writing the paper that will be associated with this. So I've mentioned a number of times that I have students who've written papers with me, and I really need to talk about that. Is at NNU in computer science, I now have 10 students who've worked on various parts of this project with me who are peer-reviewed published authors. And one of the things my friends, the archaeologists in the Boise said was, okay, when you tell us something that's a big deal, in computer science, I mean, you guys are totally geeking out. Tell us it's a big deal. Anyway, okay, so we'll tell you when we're telling something's a big deal. Okay, great. Okay, so this is me telling you guys, an undergrad getting published is an absolutely huge thing. If it rarely, like at the University of Idaho or at a University of Washington or Boise State, it rarely happens because professors that are doing research have grad students. See, at NNU, we don't have a master's program. All I have is is undergrads. So the undergrads assume the duty. So they're getting, I have 10 students, already who are peer-reviewed published authors, on the stuff that we're talking about here, this problem that we're just writing up here, and actually the issues that we're talking with the dredge tailings. Actually, there was 2 more that were supposed to be published. Their senior thesis is on that at a conference I canceled last spring break because of COVIDs. The conference just called us and said, hey, we're having the conference again. We want those theses in here. Right? Great. That's students 11 and 12. Awesome. And I've got working on this, I've got 3 more students that are working on this project going, okay, with them, it's not a matter of if they're going to get published. This paper actually was invited. The editors called us and said, hey, we know what you're working on. We want you to submit a paper, and so I send the email to my students and go, hey, look at this. Looks like someone's interested in what we're doing. And they're just going, that is so totally awesome. I would say that probably the best thing an undergraduate can do to really catch people's attention on their resume is to list a published paper, a peer-reviewed published paper. So absolutely huge opportunity my students are getting. So anyway,
and Dale, if I can
go ahead.
jump in. So what Dale's talking about here, I had a former GIS student who was going through the GIS certificate. He took our Python programming class, decided that, hey, I really kind of enjoy this programming stuff that I never knew anything about. Ended up going to NNU. I think he was planning on going there in the first place, and kind of connected with Professor Hamilton and got really excited about this. And he is one of the students who is now published.
Yeah. Yeah, great guy. I've thoroughly enjoyed working with him. He's actually in my artificial intelligence class, in my algorithms class this semester. He'll be graduating in May, and actually, I have to say I've really enjoyed having him come out of the GIS program at CWI, because I teach a GIS class at NNU, the one class we have, and it was great to have him working with all this GIS stuff, because he came in, he knew this stuff. He was ready to go, but he also recognizes, says, wow, the ability to be able to do the mapping and to generate data using machine learning is absolutely huge. And I'm going, yeah, you're right, Sam, it is huge.
Yeah.
So,
and then let me ask one other thing. So you talked about when you train the program, the computer to detect, let's say, cans.
Yep.
And although you haven't done it for the cans yet, you did for burns, so you had an accuracy of like 95, 97%.
Right.
So for example, if you have and let's say we decide that that's good enough, let's say it's 95% accuracy. So you're going to assume that 5% is going to be inaccurate.
Right.
And then is that acceptable? That's fine. We understand that some 5% of these things are not going to be correct,
Yeah,
but in terms of analysis, that's fine.
Right. So the thing that you have to ask, and it actually goes back, this is a great question, and I love addressing this. It actually goes back here to this, is when you do something new and you establish your accuracy, the question that you have to go back to, and it's the same issue I was addressing with the 24,000 series, 24K series topographical maps. You ask yourself, how do we do things now before we do it? What's that accuracy? We don't have to hit 100%. We just have to do better than anything else is doing. We don't have to hit 100%. We just have to be the best out there.
Okay.
So yeah, so I mean, yeah, we could be at 95. Could we have gone through and tried to refine the training data? Absolutely, we could have. But it was like, hey, we're all, like here on this one here. Okay, burn extent, we're already at 96, pushing 97%. Biomass consumption, 97, pushing 98%. Is it worth going after this, when the alternative we're looking at is in the 80s? So it does actually, one of the things it does get into, and I don't know if anyone on the call has taken statistics or if you guys cover this, but I mentioned the p-values down here. This is from the student's t-test, which we use for establishing statistical significance. So this is a concept we would look at and say, okay, let's compare what we're doing against the other way. Here it may be the support vector machine versus KNN. Here, on this one here, it could be spatial or 5 centimeter versus 30 meter, but we could have had this 30 meter potentially could have been like Landsat, and we go, okay, how much better is it? And that, if you're familiar with student t-test, this p-value tells you, based on the sample size you have and how much of a difference you have, how strong your statistical significance is. On both of these here, we're down at like, on this one, the SVM versus KNN, down at 0.0005. If anyone remembers working with that, you're going, 0.01 is considered to be really good. That's 1%. We're willing to be wrong 1% of the time. This is even further now. Even these out here with the burn extent p-value saying we could be wrong almost 2% of the time. But I'm going, it's ecology, and considering nothing else is any closer, we're going, hey, the other thing with this one here is we didn't have as many burns that we're able to put in this. Actually, we hit these numbers and went, we've already established, we had our alpha level, we beat it, we're stopping, we're done, at least for the purpose of the dissertation. So yeah, the take home message is you don't have to hit 100%. You just got to be the best out there.
Okay.
I mean, think about the COVID shots, the COVID vaccines. Are they 100%? Are they 100% accurate?
No.
Or 100% effective? No. But people are ecstatic of saying, oh, they're 95%. Yeah, it's a lot better than catching it.
All right.
Okay, so let's come back here. So we're talking about, went ahead, the problem someone identified of what about under the trees? Yeah, we got something here that'll pull them out. So looking at future work, Forest Service and BLM, actually with the Boise National Forest, we still have in effect a 5-year cooperative agreement with them that has to be funded annually. Because of Trump's ban on drones, they're not going to be doing anything this year. The BLM is looking at, they would put together the same sort of thing for us. So hoping next summer to be able to get something going on there. Amazon Robotics, we've actually got a really cool proposal with them that our internal sources are telling us, proposals that get as far as ours don't get turned down. They end up getting awarded. So we're just waiting on that one. But the whole idea behind that is going back to the idea of a road, being able to use deep learning to find a road and say, okay, well, what if we can take a drone and set it on a road and say, okay, launch yourself, go up to 120 meters, which is 400 feet. We can't go any higher than that. Where the FAA gets all in a tizzy. And say, okay, now look down and use deep learning while you're going to say, okay, look ahead of you. Where does the road go? Go follow it. And then go out, keep going out and say, okay, we're going to go out for a ways. Okay, now stop. And I want you to come back and I want you to loop back parallel to what you did coming back on the right side of the road, loop back around when you get back to where we launched from, come back now on the left side and keep doing these concentric circles till we get as wide of a coverage as we want to cover the area we're doing. Okay, so with that mountainous terrain, you got a problem. If you just tell it to go fly like that, you got two of them. One is you got topography. You could auger into something. So, okay, we need to be using digital elevation models. Okay, yeah, Professor Krauss, your GIS students should be knowing exactly what I'm talking about with DEMs to say, hey, I'm going to the right. The DEMs are telling me it's going up 15 meters. I better climb by 15 meters as I'm going up because I want to maintain that 120 meters above ground to maintain that consistent spatial resolution. And to not auger into anything. The other thing is, if there's anyone from the drone program there at CWI is you're going, okay, we've got one other complication is we need to be able to maintain sight of this at all times of the drone. Someone has to have eyes on at all times. So having something also in here to where we can go, hey, you just went out of sight. So you got it. So be using classic AI, you got to back up and you got to work with us so we can keep you in sight. And so have it keep backing up and going, no, you just went out of sight. Okay, we'll back up to where we knew we were in sight and keep working around the edge like that. So also, this was actually a real cool thing it's kind of future work, but also something we did last summer is I got NNU got an invitation from the Frontier Development Lab. They were working in collaboration with the Australian Space Agency. Turns out bushfire is a real big thing down in Australia. They had two. So this is like the end of their fire season right now. Last fire season, they had probably one of the biggest fires that's ever happened on the face of the earth happen. It's like it was the Gospers Mountain Fire. It's like you take all the fires in the Western US, when California was on fire, okay, you dump them all into one fire and you run it at Melbourne, Australia. They were at one point they were one day from the largest evacuation ever in the history of Australia. So anyway, their whole idea was saying, hey, with all this remote sensing data and stuff, we want to use we want to leverage artificial intelligence with this. My students and I were working with a team on that project where we were using data off Japan's Himawari satellite, which it was great. The thing that was real cool about this was after we were done, the team that we were working with, they kind of took the tactic of, hey, we're going to have 4 PhD students and postdocs working on one thing, and we're going to have these students from NNU and their professor work on this other approach to something to solve something. And we got done at the end of it, and the director, as he and I were talking when it was over, he said, you know what, Dale? He says, that other group, those postdocs, it's like, it's like, yeah, that's kind of okay. But he says, your undergrads, I love bragging about my undergrads. Says your undergrads actually put together something that with a little bit more data would actually be publishable. He says your undergrads outperformed those PhD students. So it was a great opportunity there. Frontier Development Lab saying that they want a team of NNU students working with them because of the COVID last year. Everything was up here. Everyone was working remotely, so we were working from Idaho. I'll tell you right now, the biggest pain in the butt when you're working with Australians remotely is the 2 a.m. meetings. They really suck. We all figured out that when we're calling it a day on Monday, it's the beginning of their work day Tuesday, and so we actually got to where we were working around the clock because we were working 12-hour days. They were working 12-hour days. It's like because the Americans and Australians working together is like this project never stopped for like 2 weeks straight. So it was a really good opportunity, and our students got to work with some international team of researchers. So it was a great opportunity. So, and planning on being involved with that again this summer. So with that, this is a couple of my students in the back of my Ford F-350. And yeah, this is the day that we figured out you can cover more terrain if you keep your pilot and your coordinating visual observer in the back of the truck, and you just literally chase the drone down the road. So that was a good day. I actually, that same time, I got a lot of mountain biking in, of trying to get Ford Creeks and stuff like that to get a different perspective on the drone. But having more fun than a professor should be allowed to have.
Dale, I think we have a comment here.
Yeah.
Is there a reason to use drones versus LiDAR/radar mounted on drones to avoid obstacles? Do you see the chat? Maybe.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay.
I can see it. We could, I think what the idea is with the DEMs, more of the issue is keep it up at a consistent AGL, above ground level altitude, for the consistent spatial resolution. They're actually, one of the things we found is we're working some archaeological sites, trying to actually work archaeological artifacts instead of features. So the difference there is archaeological features are big things that you don't move: dredge tailings, bridges, foundations. Artifacts are things that you can move, cans. So we had one place where we were going, one time when we were at a camp, at a mining site, and trying to get really down. We're actually flying below the canopy because we were wanting resolution in millimeters. Actually, the Phantoms do really good for not running into stuff, because as we were trying to fly between trees, at one point it would go, no, I'm not going forward because there's a tree there. The pilot just moved it to the right and then pushed it forward. So you can do that. It's more an issue of just keep it up where it needs to be. The other thing though is, as you got the thing cranked open and you're just going, you just want to keep it above stuff so you're not running into it. By the time you get to the point where you're relying on LiDAR or radar for obstacle avoidance, you're already, for the kinds of stuff we're doing, you're already too low.
Let me ask a question. So when I have the opportunity, and maybe you can speak to this in just kind of general terms, I try to stress, I mean, you can get your drone pilot license and then just simply create mission plans, fly drones. Mm-hmm. But I would argue that the more maybe exciting, the more job potential, and ever kind of promoting career would be doing the analysis of this, whether it's the machine learning. Somebody has to take this information, this data, and turn that data into information. And so somebody has to have that power and that skill to do that, more than just flying it. Oh,
absolutely. Yeah, it's cool. And some of my best days, have not been in the office. It's been, out in the field, being a visual observer or flying. Usually I let my students fly, and I'm more than willing to be the guy who's hiking through the forest trying to get to where I can keep an eye on the drone. Yeah, you're right. Actually, this gets back to one of the first discussions I had with someone about using drones, and it was, I was talking with Mark Bathrick, who's the Department of Interior Director of Aviation Services. So he's like really, really high up in the Department of Interior. And his comment to me, right as I was just starting to get involved with starting to work with drones, was he pulled me aside and he says, Dale, the last thing that I need on my desk is more pictures. He says, do not dump more pictures. on my analyst desk. He said, what I need is actionable knowledge.
Right.
So from my standpoint, yeah, it's cool flying drones. Quite honestly, you know, if I had to put the balloon on, if I had to put the camera on a balloon, I would do that. If I had to put it on a kite, I would do it. The drone is just the horse that gets the camera where it needs to be to take the picture. From the picture, it's running it through the analysis to extract knowledge. So yeah, the question is, you know, what's more important, this picture, you know, this picture here, or being able to tell me where we had burn severity, where the fire burned? Just from this picture, it doesn't tell me a whole lot. But when I look at this and go, okay, I can tell where the fire burned. I've got a map layer. I've got a GIS layer. That's something that a land manager can go in and go, okay, this is the remediation steps we're going to take. And more importantly, some of these areas off here, you know, here is that unburned vegetation. That's huge because nobody's doing anything with that yet. Of looking at where are the unburned patches inside a fire. But that's huge for burn recovery.
All right. So let me ask another question. Does anybody else have a question they want to talk, present? Looks like we have Bob in the chat there. Can you see that there, Dale?
Oh, Bob. Okay. Okay. Yeah, there we go. What happens if the drone exceeds more than 120 meters above ground level to get above an object? Okay, that kind of gets into an interesting thing of the Part 107 regulations say if you are within 400 feet of the object, you can raise it up to the point at which it is 400 feet above the object. So think, towers, radio towers. They use drones with radio towers, for inspections, and they get around the 400-foot rule on, really huge towers by keeping it within 400 feet. The whole idea between 400 feet is there's not going to be manned aircraft in there. So we actually have used this to our advantage. It's our interpretation of the rule that says, okay, if we've got 100-foot trees, that actually means we can fly at 500 feet because we're 400 feet above the trees. Do we really want to go that high? No, because I think, well, actually, if we could get higher, it probably wouldn't be a bad thing because with some simple tests I've done, I've resampled imagery to, instead of being 5 centimeter, being 10 centimeter, ran it through the support vector machine and it says, are the burn severity maps any worse? And they really don't look any worse, except I just reduced my amount of data by a factor of 4. So my support vector machine runs in a quarter of the time. So it's that issue there of you can go above 120 meters to get over an object. Stay within 120 meters of it until you get within 100, until you get back to 120 meters AGL. Do we have any other questions?
Any other questions? So I have just another, well, let me give a second here if anybody else have a question? So I have a quick question. So you mentioned, you talked about, maybe you can explain to the people listening. You mentioned about the resolution, 5 meter and 30 meter.
5 centimeter.
Or 5 centimeter and 30 centimeter. Was it 30 centimeter or 30 meter?
Yep. It's 30 meter, 5 centimeter. Okay,
5
so
centimeter. Okay.
Pull that into perspective. 5 centimeters is about 1 inch by 1 inch.
Right.
Okay. So 30 meters is a quarter acre.
Yeah. And right. So obviously you're going to scale. So a 30 meter, you're going to have to cover a much larger area of ground than a 5 centimeter.
Yeah, so exactly.
With today's mindset of the more the better, why wouldn't you want to go even finer scale than 5 centimeter? Why not go down to 1 centimeter or something like that? Talk about the limitations of that.
So A lot of it depends on what is it that you're trying to map. What is it you're trying to find? What is the size of the object? So I have another one of the professors at NNU is using drones and doing work with peach blossoms. So peach blossoms are like little itty bitty things. And his research is looking at saying, can we use machine learning to go in and classify, find the peach blossoms and then get an estimate of how many peach blossoms there are on the tree, which then you can come back from that and go, okay, well, what's the yield? In the spring, you can theoretically come back and say, okay, in the fall, this is how many peaches I'm going to have. I mean, for the futures market, that's huge. But these little itty bitty peaches, okay, he needs to be getting in really closely. So Dr. Buchanan, he flies his drones at like 30 feet, 30, 40 feet, because he needs to get the real high resolution. With the stuff I'm doing, I'm looking at a tree and I'm going, this tree is like, 30 feet across. I'm looking out my window here at a tree in the backyard and go, it's a spruce tree that's like 30 feet across. And I'm going, okay, how many pixels do I need in that? One of the problems you have with spatial resolution, this is a great question, is when I increase my resolution from say 1 meter to a half meter, I'm actually increasing the amount of data by a factor of 4 because it's a square. Actually increasing the amount of 1 meter to a half. Hold on, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
All right, I think there's a little back coming there. Okay. And then we have another question in the chat room too after you're done.
Okay, yeah, so anyway, getting back with the question there on the spatial resolution is you increase the amount of data, but what you want is information. And I mentioned at one point that I resampled 5 centimeter data to 10 centimeter data and then ran it through the support vector machine and went, does it look any worse? I went, no, there's not any more information. So as your data increases, you hit a point where your information no longer is increasing. And that's the point what you want to say, that's the resolution I want. Unfortunately, we can't go above 120 meters. So we're kind of stuck with, unless you want to just downsample your imagery, you're kind of stuck with 5 centimeter. What would be great is if we could say, oh, we're out in the middle of the Boise National Forest. There's nobody around anywhere. Can't we fly it at 240 meters? That now we don't have to, we can cover more ground quicker because instead of flying our flight paths, like 100 meters apart, we can now go 200 meters apart and we can cover twice as much ground. But yeah, just increasing resolution, you have to ask yourself, is that going to actually give you more information? If you're looking at trees, no. If you're looking at peach blossoms or cans, yes.
So we have a question here. I can read it. Can you read it, or do you want me to read it too?
Okay, I think I can get it here.
Michael
okay, so we've actually got 2 of them. The matter of keeping. In the matter of keeping an eye on the drone, can you use one drone to track another drone? Useful for areas where it gets hard to get a person on the ground. No, you cannot. My understanding of the rules is you cannot do that because whoever is looking at the drone, the visual observer has to be able to see the drone with an unaided eye. That means no binoculars. This is it's a great theory, and it's one we would love to use because it would make life so much easier. So yeah, the way we interpret it is it has to be the unaided eye, and the visual observer has to be within voice contact of the drone pilot. Okay, so one way you can do is say, okay, you can have someone who's within shouting distance. The way we interpret the rule is, and I'm not an attorney, so I'm not sure that this is okay, but we haven't gotten into any trouble with it yet, is have people in radio contact with the pilot. So I mentioned the coordinating and visual observer. In the back of the truck, you saw there was two people. There's a guy flying the drone, and then there's a coordinating visual, what we call the coordinating visual observer, which is basically his radio man. Plus also is keeping track of, is there anyone who actually is seeing it right now? And he's constantly radioing back with, hey, Alicia, are you seeing the drone? Can you still see it? Okay, Bob, can you see it yet? It should be coming towards you. That coordinating that, making sure someone can see it, because the big things that you're looking for, two things. One is you want to ensure that you're not going to auger it into something. Second one is you don't want it to get taken out by an eagle, which that's fun. When you have a visual observer telling the pilot, because the pilot can't see it, but the visual observer, remote visual observer, can see it, and is telling the pilot what to do with the drone to get it away from an eagle. That's lots of fun. And then the other thing is, and this is from the FAA standpoint, this is the biggest thing, is manned aircraft. Is what are you going to do when you got, if you have manned aircraft coming through? Up in the Boise Basin, it's never, I think in the 2 years flying, this has only been an issue once, where we had to pull a drone in because there's an aircraft in the area. So we're in an area where there's not a lot of traffic, but still it's a, we hear it and people are trying to figure out, all the visual observers trying to figure out where the thing's at, and trying to get it in. In one instance, we actually had a situation where a visual observer said, you're not going to get it down. I'm under it. Start bringing it down, and radioed in to the pilot how to land it. And say, okay, you got your 10 feet. You've got a good surface to land on, 10 feet, 5 feet, 3 feet, 2 feet. Okay, now tell it to land, put it into auto land. And it went ahead and went down. With the pilot not seeing it, just being walked through what to do with the drone to do that. Okay, so let's see. Where are we at in our questions here? Okay, so the next one's from Cameron. Is there a point where costs?
You're breaking up, Dale.
Before accuracy in the most accurate way.
Dale, you're breaking up.
Is there a point where the cost goes? Yeah, I was saying you're kind of looking at, am I breaking up?
Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit.
Okay, I'm gonna try grabbing my laptop. Plus point, I don't need out by the router. Are we breaking up still?
That's better.
Okay. Okay, so
we got Cameron, Alex, and then Megan.
Yep. Okay, so is there a point where the cost goes? Well, I think the thing is, probably the way we would look at this is, as you're looking at accuracy and getting higher resolution imagery, it gets back to that thing of, you don't want to bring the drone down to get higher, to a lower AGL to get higher resolution if you don't need it, because if say instead of 120 meters, with 120 meters, to be able to get adequate overlap from pictures from one flight path to the next, you have to be about 100 meters apart. If you go down to 60 meters, then you've got to be about 50 meters apart, which means you can't do as much, you can't cover as much ground. If you're having to run your flight paths closer together. So that would be one area where I'd say, yeah, don't go after more does not mean better in that case, because it means your cost that you're going to have that is you're not going to get as large of an extent. Okay, so let me see. So that was from Cameron.
Now we have Alex.
Alex. Okay, hang on a second. Okay. There we go. I know that you had mentioned it a bit before. There are current regulations in place that are halting your current projects from proceeding. Okay, yeah. So what that is the, okay, so I'm going to go into more detail on that. Is the Trump administration, there were two factors involved. One of it was there was concern, and is in the license agreement with DJI, that they said that there was concern that the imagery and telemetry data off drones would end up on a server in Beijing. In the license agreement, DJI gets permission to grab that data. The people I've worked with, who are the drone experts for the Department of Interior, said there's no evidence that any of that data is actually gone to Beijing, gone to China, but they're going, we're not comfortable if someone's using a drone, a drone at the Idaho National Lab to be looking at, some of their research facilities. Obviously, we don't want that imagery going to China. There's no way we want that going to China. So that's what the concern was there. From our standpoint, we're going, it's a bunch of rocks in the Boise Basin. Who cares if the Chinese go? But I get they have to paint everything with a broad brush. So until, and then the problem they had where they say you can't take any drones is then you go, okay, so we can't do DJI drones. But the problem is if you look at components in the drones, in the small unmanned aircraft systems, the problem is you can't get any drone made anywhere in the world that doesn't have parts from China, parts that we can't guarantee wouldn't, once they hit a Wi-Fi signal, a wireless network signal, wouldn't send stuff or couldn't theoretically send stuff to China. So that means a Parrot, by France, is out. 3D Robotics isn't doing drones anymore, but there are other American systems. Nope, they're not doing it either. So that's kind of what's going on there with the with that ban that the federal government has, and it's not just saying the federal drones, those the small unmanned aircraft systems can't go. Also, the federal government cannot do collaboration with anyone else who's using them. That's where it's hamstrung us with NNU, and that's why we're really looking forward to getting this grant from Amazon, because Amazon doesn't care and they would fund us anyway. So that would be really, really good. Okay, so that was from Alex. Now we have Megan. Are there any stipulations with using drones in areas with wildlife in regards to noise pollution produced by the drones? Okay, so what I do know of, my house here, our property adjoins the Deer Flat Wildlife Refuge, and that's one of my favorite places to go running. If you guys are familiar with the visitor center, what I do know there, I've talked with the refuge manager there. The rule with what National Wildlife Refuges is you cannot launch, land, or fly a drone in a National Wildlife Refuge. So what does that mean you can do? Well, that means if you're outside the wildlife refuge, like my backyard, I can put a drone up, I can fly the drone over the refuge, and then I can bring it back. I'm sitting on my back deck. I can bring it back and I can land it. That's permissible to do. There are regulations that you cannot harass wildlife with them. There are also, I'm trying to remember the difference between the regs in Montana and here, because I hunted when I was up in Montana before we moved down here, and I haven't gotten back into it down here. but I believe in both states it is illegal to use drones. I think it's illegal to even have a drone up the same day that you've been hunting. So there would be that. Okay.
I think that's the last. Is there any other questions? If anybody has any questions that they think of after this this presentation, you can feel free to email me, Brian Krause at cwi.edu. I'll put that in the chat, and then I can either answer your question or I can send it to Dale.
And also, if anyone's interested, has any questions about studying computer science at Northwest Nazarene University, dhamilton@nnu.edu, fire me off an email. We're just having our first cohort of graduates coming both out with the data science concentrations and the cybersecurity concentrations, both for our Bachelor of Science and Bachelor of Arts Computer Science. So lots of different opportunities, lots of different avenues you can go, with computer science there. The other thing I'll say about computer science at NNU is we have 100% placement rate. Every student in the 25 years we've had computer science has gotten a job in the field or gone on to grad school if they wanted to go to grad school. I think up until this year, we had complications because of COVID. There's a couple of students who the 4 years prior to that, all of the students, when they went through commencement, they had jobs waiting for them already. I mean, they was like, okay, Monday, I'm going into work. There are a couple this last May who it took them a little bit of time because of the pandemic to land something. But they all eventually were able to land something. And here in the Treasure Valley, there's a lot of tech companies. And a lot of my students are getting interns making really, even during while they're students are getting jobs making really good money. So like Kevin McCarty, one of the other CS professors, as he says, if you're having to pay for school while you're going to school, with computer science, shouldn't be a problem to get an internship to pay a really good internship to help pay for school while you're a student.
All right. Does anybody else have any other questions? And I think if not, we can wrap it up, and you can either contact me or Dale.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, Dale, thank you for taking the time for doing this.
Okay. Well, thank you.
It was great.
Yeah, this was good. It worked really well to use Zoom to be able to talk with people. I do look forward to the pandemic being over and actually being able to get on the CWI campus again.
Yes, yeah, we'll look forward to that. All right. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate you taking the time to join this.
Okay, catch